Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Today, we are taking a deep dive into the hidden, underlying layers of the artificial intelligence industry. We are talking about a market with a combined valuation north of $1.8 trillion between its biggest players, and it is moving at an absolutely breakneck pace. But as you're going to see, the surface-level story of competing chatbots is really just that, surface level.
Right off the bat, I want to hit you with a bit of a counterintuitive question. If intelligence is essentially becoming free, or at least incredibly cheap and commoditized, how exactly is AI a $1.8 trillion market? Think about it. OpenAI and Anthropic are racing toward highly anticipated IPOs with absolutely massive valuations. But if their core product is becoming less and less unique, what are investors actually buying?
Well, spoiler alert, the answer isn't in the code. It's in the economics, the monopolies, and a really fascinating, high-stakes game of regulatory capture. Think of this explainer as peeling an onion. We're going to look way beneath the surface-level chatbot wars to find what truly drives the AI market. And I promise you, the deeper we go, the more surprising these business strategies actually become.
All right, Layer 1. When every model is smart.
We really need to explore this new reality, which is that raw intelligence is simply no longer a unique differentiator. Look at this leaderboard from LMSYS. It's based on human blind testing, so think of it kind of like chess rankings for AI. Just look at how tightly clustered these top models are. You've got OpenAI's ChatGPT 4o at 1316, followed right on its heels by Google's Gemini, XAI's Grok, Anthropic's Claude, and Meta's open-source Llama. The difference between number 1 and number 5 is minimal. A mere 17 points separates the top two. When products become this indistinguishable, economists call it Bertrand competition, which is really just a fancy way of saying a brutal price war, where profits eventually just nosedive to zero. So, because their base intelligence levels are nearly identical, the two giants of the space are utilizing sharply divergent business strategies to stand out. OpenAI is betting everything on scale. Their goal is massive distribution, creating a daily habit for 1 billion users. They basically want ChatGPT to be the default verb for thinking and writing. Anthropic, on the other hand, they're betting on something completely different. They present Claude not as a mass-market consumer brand, but as a highly predictable, specialized tool governed by a strict 20,000-word constitution, which, let's be honest, is probably more reading than most of us did in our entire freshman year of college.
Moving on to Layer 2, the economics of scale. To truly understand this market, we have to shift our focus away from model intelligence and look at the punishing financial realities of participating in this race. Just look at the incredibly steep trajectory on the right side of this data from Epoch. Creating a frontier foundation model requires a massive upfront fixed cost. We aren't talking about a couple servers in a garage anymore, guys. We're talking about industrial-scale operations that maybe only a handful of entities on the entire planet can actually afford to maintain.
And the crucial point here is this number, 4.1x. That staggering figure represents the yearly multiplying factor for the amount of compute deployed in training frontier AI models over the past 15 years. Every single year, the processing power required just to stay at the cutting edge more than quadruples. That's just wild.
Let's put some real dollars behind that abstract idea of compute. $130 million. That is the estimated cost to train just one frontier model, Google's Gemini Ultra, in 2023 alone. And remember, that's just the fixed cost for the initial pre-training phase. That doesn't cover fine-tuning, paying expert human reviewers, or the massive ongoing energy bills required to actually run the model for users every day.
Which brings us to Layer 3, the AI compute monopoly.
If software makers are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to train basically identical models, you gotta ask, who is actually cashing those checks? Well, while the software side is a fierce, price-slashing dogfight, the hardware side is a stunning monopoly. NVIDIA controls an estimated 92% of the data center GPU market. They're supplying the essential chips to absolutely everyone. OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Meta, you name it. The software providers are locked in a vicious race, but they are all paying rent to run on NVIDIA's track. Now, contrast NVIDIA's hardware monopoly with the consumer-facing AI market. This chart breaks down the generative AI market share. While it's definitely more fragmented than the hardware side, just look at the dominance of OpenAI at 39%, right alongside its primary backer, Microsoft, at 30%. Together, they control a massive combined 69% share. But wait, remember our very first point? Their underlying model isn't actually that much smarter than the competition anymore. So why on earth are they winning?
That leads us right into Section 4, Trust as the New Moat.
We are moving past the hard economics of silicon now and into the crucial, soft battleground of enterprise reliability. Because the underlying AI models are practically invisible and mathematically pretty similar. A company's brand can no longer just be a cool logo or color palette. In AI, brand is completely defined by behavior. It's a pattern of predictable behavior and identity built across millions of interactions. You don't trust a benchmark score. You trust a pattern you recognize. When two models can reach the exact same answer, how they get there, whether they're terse, patient, cautious, or creative, that becomes their entire identity.
And this is exactly why enterprise leaders care way more about this behavioral consistency than a 2-point bump on a benchmark. Trust hardens into infrastructure. When a company builds its engineering pipeline around a specific model, predictability basically acts as risk underwriting for their legal and compliance teams. If a model hallucinates or acts erratically, that carries massive real-world costs. So if you want to switch AI providers today, it's not just a financial decision anymore, it is a full-on organizational rewiring. Trust is literally the stickiest moat in the entire industry.
And finally, our deepest layer, Section 5, the regulatory capture trap.
This brings us to what I think is the most fascinating dynamic of the whole space, the high-stakes chess game of AI safety. Regulatory capture is an economic concept that happens when a regulatory process ends up serving the interests of the established industry players rather than the public, often by creating high barriers to entry. In the AI space, rules that require expensive safety audits, massive compliance teams, and very specific deployment models naturally favor the well-funded frontier labs. A startup in a garage or an open-source developer simply cannot afford to jump through all those regulatory hoops.
Let's look at how this actually played out in the real world with Anthropic. They heavily positioned themselves as the safe AI, and they actively lobbied for strict safety regulations. Subsequently, Biden-era policies, like the 2023 executive order, were built heavily around the capabilities and safety testing methods of those frontier labs. However, political environments shift. When the Trump administration came in, the focus changed sharply to deregulation and national AI dominance. Ironically, the very company that championed those safety frameworks, Anthropic, found its Claude model restricted or banned by certain U.S. government agencies.
So why did this happen? It really is a textbook case of how a regulatory positioning can suddenly turn into a massive liability. The government agencies restricted Claude due to a mix of factors. First, Anthropic has complex ownership structures with heavy investments from Google and Amazon. Second, they had a very close political association with the prior administration's regulatory agenda. Third, there were security concerns regarding cloud-based data pipelines. And finally, the government simply had access to alternative, less politically entangled models. It highlights just how incredibly fragile it is to rely on a single AI model when the political and procurement landscapes are shifting this fast.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. In an era where intelligence is free, trust is the only thing left to charge a premium for. As we've explored, the code is commoditized, the hardware is heavily monopolized, and the regulations are incredibly fragile. So, as these massive AI companies race toward their IPOs, I want to leave you with this question. In a landscape shifting this wildly, whose trust is truly worth paying for? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.